The savanna lands of eastern Venezuela are sandy and grassy. A few hardy trees called chaparros dot the landscape. Although annual rainfall is about 60 inches yearly, there are two seasons, 6 months wet and 6 months dry. Living conditions of the campesinos are not modern. Their roofs are generally made of marichi palm and the walls plastered with an adobe mixture of clay and straw called bahareque. Some houses are constructed almost entirely of marichi palm. Typically, the campesinos in the area burned off the tough, dry savanna grass at the start of the dry season, usually in December or January of each year. As you can see, it almost looks like a burned-out desert. Of course, the rainy season starts in May, bringing tender sprouts of savanna grass and new life to the region. However, pickings were mighty slim for cattle such as this as they tried to scratch a living from the barren wasteland. This is my friend Dr. Gonzalez Orsini of El Tigre, Venezuela. He was a pioneer of modern agricultural techniques in eastern Venezuela and known to all as Dr. Orsini. Although he ran a clinic and was a fine doctor, his true love was the land and agriculture, especially cattle raising. Here on his ranch west of El Tigre, Venezuela, he has planted pangola grass, a native of South Africa. Of course, pangola will not resist the ravages of the 6-month dry season and requires irrigation during this period. However, Dr. Orsini was also a pioneer in irrigation techniques and changed the barren dry mesa that you saw into thick grass cover and fertile loam such as this. He raised chickens on his farm, also pigs and horses and cattle. In fact, he had an outstanding herd of Brahma cattle, of which he was very proud. Here he proudly shows one of his fine specimens. Of course, hired hands carried out most of the work, but Dr. Orsini directly supervised the entire operation. He created this pond as a source of water for his irrigation system. On the far side you can see a float. The pump and prime mover for the system are mounted on this float. In the background you can see the irrigation system spraying water over the field of pangola grass. It was a remarkable change in the agricultural system of eastern Venezuela. He also raised corn. Here he is chopping it up and loading directly into a wagon. This will be placed in a silage trench he has constructed and used to feed his cattle. Here they are unloading the chopped up corn into the silage trench and tamping it down with a bulldozer. In 1950, this was a revolutionary approach to farming and ranching methods in eastern Venezuela. Indeed, Dr. Orsini was a pioneer and introduced many innovative approaches in farming and ranching in eastern Venezuela. Luis Felipe Sabino Arioja was my friend, and a conventional farmer and rancher south of Cantaura. He raised various crops as well as cattle and horses. Here you can see the Venezuelan way of tying horses together, nose to tail. I wanted to take a picture of the rice stored on a rack safely out of reach of mice and varmints, but the lady insisted I take a picture of her child. I finally got the picture of the rice, but when I tried to show her using the pilon or mortar and pestle to grind corn, I was interrupted by other women of the household who insisted on showing off their children. So I spent the rest of the afternoon taking pictures of children. They seemed to come from all four corners of the ranch, and everyone was extremely proud of their child. One day I stopped by a small farm where they were planting corn. I asked to see the seed they were using. I was shocked when they handed me this ear of corn. There was no way they could produce a decent crop using seed from an ear of corn like this. I contacted many people and discovered that good seed was indeed available through the Venezuelan Ministry of Agriculture. The seed was not hybrid and entirely suitable for replanting from crop yield. It was known as Semilla Mejorada, or improved seed, and came in 3 varieties. I also learned that fertilizer was available through the Venezuelan Petrochemical Institute. The North American Association purchased more than a ton of fertilizer and several hundred pounds of seed. A total of 100 seed distribution kits were made up, consisting of 2 kilos of seed and 20 kilos of fertilizer. Volunteers from San Tomé then dispatched the kits to every campesino and farmer they could find in our region on the Mesa de Guanipa. Everyone seemed to understand the value of high-quality seeds, but many looked at the fertilizer with skepticism and quite often with downright suspicion. The results of the program were absolutely fantastic. The yields were outstanding by comparison with previous crops. As may be seen, the corn was often as high as an elephant's eye. This fellow obviously did everything right and used fertilizer. He proudly shows us an ear of yellow corn, the flint hard Mara variety. This seemed to be the favorite variety for most of the campesinos. When I tried to take this farmer's picture, he objected, saying, "Don't take my picture, take a picture of my men in the fine corn crop." He had a group of hired hands working different farm plots. This worker was apparently skeptical about using fertilizer. He produced a decent crop of the yellow Mara variety, but Bachaco ants got the tips off the cobs. The other hands did very well, producing the white Obregon and the yellow Venezuelan No. 1 varieties, but there was some damage by the ants to the tips of the cobs. My friend Don Pedro Chaucin had a farm north of San Tomé and periodically checked progress of the experimental planting. One problem he encountered was leaf-cutting ants called bachacos. These ants were voracious and neatly clipped the small kernels of corn off the tips of the cob. They then carried them back to their underground home or bachaquero to create a food supply for their colony. When they got greedy and nipped off the larger kernels farther down the tip, they proved too heavy, as may be seen by the trail of kernels dropped along the way. Here you can see the limited damage done by the vachacos to the tip of the cob. All in all, it was a very successful program. I learned a lot, and they learned a lot. This fellow was happy, and I was happy too. In 1985, I returned to Venezuela as a guest of Dr. Orsini. I was astounded at the changes that had taken place since I first arrived in 1947. The barren savanna land of the Mesa de Guanipa was transformed into dozens of irrigated farms. It was indeed an agricultural revolution. Further, it was comforting to note that our corn seed project 22 years earlier had played a small part in this revolution. And our input came about all because of one small ear of corn.